As a songwriter and composer, learning how to write in minor keys is one of the most important skills we can develop. And when we understand how minor chord progressions fit together, we get access to a whole new palette of sounds, more options, more variety, and most importantly, it allows us to express a greater range of emotions and communicate a wider variety of narratives. So in this video, I want to talk about writing in minor keys and picking the perfect chords for whatever song you're writing. Now, throughout this video, I'm going to stay primarily in the diatonic system and focus on the relative minor, also referred to as the Aeolian Mode. But I'll also show you some slight variations on these chords, borrowing sounds from outside of the key and giving you a sense of how you can utilize those in practical ways. In a previous video called Picking the Perfect Chords, I looked at how you can gain control over your chord choices by understanding the home, departure, and return functions of the chords within your progression. And a lot of what I'm talking about today is going to follow on from that video. So I encourage you to go back and check out that video if you want to get a good grasp on the fundamentals of chord theory before diving into this material. So given that we're staying within the diatonic system, let's just revisit the chords we have available to us in the key of C. And we start with our 1 chord, we go to our 2 chord, the D minor, we go to our 3 chord, the E minor, we go to our 4 chord, the F, we go to our 5 chord, the G, we go to our 6 chord, the A minor, we go to our 7 chord, the B diminished, which brings us back home to the C chord, to the 1. So when we look at our diatonic system, we see that we have the relative minor in 6th position. The A minor is the relative minor of C. And now what we're going to do is we're going to turn the A minor into our new home. We're going to make it our new 1 chord. But before we do that, we need to understand that these 7 chords in the diatonic system are essentially working in a loop. So if we make our A minor chord the new 1 chord, we can then take the other chords that follow and we can rearrange them so that they're still in the same order, but the sequence is different because we've now made A minor the 1. And this gives us the new progression, starting on the A minor. We have our A minor as the 1. We have our B diminished as the 2. We have our C chord now as the 3, the relative major. We have our D minor as the 4. We have our E minor as the 5 chord. We have our F major as the 6. We have our G major as the 7. And then we come back to A minor as our home. So it's important that we understand that we're not still in the key of C. We're using the same chords as we were in the key of C, but we've transferred that home function to the A minor. We've made it the tonal center. It's now home base. It's the chord that we want to return to. We can do this in any key. We can take the major chord progression of any key, find the relative minor, make the relative minor our new home, our new 1, and then rearrange the chords. They're still the same chords, they're still in the same order technically, but now they're operating functionally in a different way. And that's what I want to talk about next. What are the functions of these chords when we're now writing in a minor key? When we were in a major key, we had the 1, the 4, the 5 as major. Now that we're in the minor key, the 1, 4, 5 are minor. The A minor, the D minor, the E minor, and back to the A minor. So we have, in a sense, the same functions at play, but there are some subtle variations, and let's talk about those. A minor is home, solid. It's the 1. We have the D minor as the 4 chord, giving us that sense of departure. We have the E minor as the 5 chord, which should be giving us that sense of return. And in a way it does because it's in the 5th position. But because it's minor, it lacks the pull of a major or a dominant chord. And this changes the way we write in minor keys. That 5 chord really becomes quite a big variable that we can do a lot of things with. It gives us a lot of flexibility, and we'll look at some examples of those. Now, in regards to substitutions, we have the C chord, which is now the relative major of A minor, being a substitution. And it gives us that light, bright alternative. When we look at our departure chord, the D minor, just like when we're in the key of C major, the substitution for that chord is the F major. In this case, it's now in the 6th position, relative to A minor as the 1. Now the 5 chord is where it gets interesting, because as I was just saying, the E minor that sits in 5th position doesn't have the same pull back to the 1. So when it's in its naturally occurring state of minor, diatonically, it doesn't serve that traditional 5-1 function. As substitutes for that 5 chord, we do have the G chord, which is in the 7th position, pulling us back to the 1. We also have the B diminished, the 2 chord, pulling us back. Let's look at a song that uses the E minor in its diatonic form, and that song is the classic Ain't No Sunshine by Bill Withers. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone, it's not warm when she's away. There ain't no sunshine when she's gone, she's always gone too long. Anytime she goes away. So in this song, you have the A minor being firmly established. We go back to the A minor regular. But we go to the E minor, which is in the 5 chord position, and yet it's not the chord that's really pulling us back to home. It's not serving that return function. The G major is what's serving that function and pulling us back. Keeping the E minor diatonic in this song creates some ambiguity around its function. When we're in the key of C, A minor was one of our substitutes, but E minor was another substitute because they share so many common notes. They share 2 of the 3 same notes. E minor is also the relative minor of G. So if G is functioning as our return chord, pulling us back to 1, E minor is kind of like a little build-up to that return. It's also kind of serving that return function, not just because it's the relative minor of G, but because it also sits in that 5 chord position. But then when we go down to the second half of that verse, ain't no sunshine when she's gone, she's always gone too long, anytime she goes away. You can hear there that that is not pulling us back to the 1 when it's being used in that way. It's being used in a way that is happy to be staying away from home. It's being used more in a departure function before it goes to the D minor. And the D minor, the 4 chord, is in fact the one that brings us back. So when you're writing in the relative minor or the natural minor or the Aeolian mode, you get this naturally occurring minor 5 chord, and it gives you this flexibility. It's kind of ambiguous with its functionality. It can be used to create almost a sense of departure. It can be used to imply coming home. It can also be used as a substitute for the 1 or the major 3, the relative major, because they share 2 of those 3 notes. So it has this tremendous flexibility and versatility in it, and you can use that to your advantage. But now let's look at what happens when you turn that minor 5 chord, that E minor, into an E7. When we want to really firmly establish that sense that A minor is the one chord, that home, that tonal center, so often the 5 chord is turned into a dominant. And a great example of this is that classic minor blues tune, The Thrill Is Gone, written by Roy Hawkins, Rick Darnell, and made famous by B.B. King. Thrill is gone. Thrill is gone away. Thrill is gone. Thrill is gone. You done me wrong, and you're gonna be so sorry someday. Yeah. Now with this song, we can hear the difference. This chord progression is highlighting some very clear functions. We have that A minor again as our tonal center. It's the 1. Then we go to our 4 chord, the D minor, which is our departure chord. Now we go down to an F major 7, which is our 6th chord. Now, that's a departure chord. We saw before that D minor and F major are linked. So F major 7 in this case, a 4-note voicing of the F major triad, adding that major 7 note. It's a substitute for D minor, so it's a lovely sound to introduce at that point. But then it falls by a semitone to the E7. And that E7, sitting in 5th position, pulls strongly back to the 1. It gives us a tremendous amount of resolution when we finally come back to the 1. So if we play that last little section with an E minor now, the diatonic, naturally occurring E minor instead of the E7, you'll hear it doesn't have the same effect. It's still nice, it's still pretty, but it doesn't have the same impact as... And the reason for that is that the E7 chord has introduced a new note. It's introduced a note that's not in the scale. It's not diatonic, and that note is G sharp. So when we look at an E7 chord, we have E, G sharp, B, and D. And that G sharp is the crucial difference. The G sharp is a semitone away from A, our home. It's that note there pulling us back. And when we're speaking about harmony or melody, the strongest resolution you can have is by a semitone. And so in this case, the G sharp that's in that E7 chord pulls us back to the 1. So when you're writing in a minor key, it's a really common thing to take that 5 chord and make it a dominant chord instead of leaving it as a minor. But you also have the option of leaving it as a minor and creating this ambiguity of function, like we heard in Ain't No Sunshine. You have these options and you have this flexibility, and you get to pick and choose when you want to use them. And a song that I wrote that I think demonstrates this well is a song called Whatever Makes You Happy, in the key of F minor, using both the minor 5 and the dominant 5. Once saw a man so crippled, I had to look away. Wasn't that he couldn't stand or get by from day to day. His affliction was a reoccurring existential kind of dismay. Took my time approaching salutations I then gave, before asking what it was made his soul misbehave. He said it felt like he had not just 1 but 2 feet squarely in the grave. He said, do whatever makes you happy, I promise you care. Worry about the rest later on. Know that there are some things you may never understand. Don't worry about the rest later on. It's moving through the chords quickly, but you can still hear the use of both the minor 5 and the dominant 5. And so we start off with the 1 chord. We establish the tonal center. We go to the 4 chord, create our sense of departure, and then we go to the 6 chord, which is a substitute for that departure, because I want us to stay away from home. We then begin the descend back, and here I use the 5 chord in its naturally occurring minor state before returning back to the 4 chord. So we're away from home this whole time. All I'm trying to do is delay that sense of resolution back to 1. But just before I come back to the 1, I hit the 5 chord in its dominant form. I turn that C minor into a C7. So you get this sound. Going to the 4 chord, 6 chord, minor 5, minor 4, and then dominant 5. And you can hear that dominant 5 setting us up to come back to the 1. It's really pulling us back to that chord. So that's how you can introduce both the minor 5 and the dominant 5 to do different things. Now, once we've established that we can make that 5 chord dominant, it gives us a much clearer sense of the functions of our other chords and the substitutes that are available. And we can also see this play out when we start expanding our chords from triads into 4-note voicings. So if we go back and look at our chord sequence now, and instead of playing them as triads, we're going to turn them into 7th chords. We're going to add a 4th note. We now have A minor 7. We have B half diminished, or B minor 7 flat 5. We have C major 7. We have D minor 7. We have E minor 7. We have F major 7. We have G7. And then back to A minor 7. And that 4-note voicing changes things when it comes to available substitutions. Now, when we play this B half diminished, we get some options. It can still function as a substitute for the 5 chord, because if we put a G in the bass, we now have a G dominant 9. But the other thing that's really interesting about half diminished chords is when you look at this chord and take off the root, we are left with a perfect D minor triad. So this B half diminished has the notes B, F, A, D. And that F, A, D is a perfect D minor triad. There's a perfect D minor triad nestled within that B half diminished. And you see this very clearly with some of the voicings on guitar. Here's a B half diminished. And there's the D minor. And you can hear them and see how connected they are. So if we were playing in the key of A minor, going to the 4 chord gives us that sense of departure. Back to the 1, but now the B half diminished is going to give us that sense of departure as well. It's a substitute with a slight twist. And what it really gears us up for, what it really prepares the ear for, is that sense of return. So when we're playing the D minor, it doesn't really need to go to the 5 chord or pull us to a substitute of the 5 chord. It's just happy being there as a departure chord back to the 1. Back to departure, back to the 1. But when we pull in the B half diminished, because we're so comfortable hearing what is commonly referred to as a 2-5-1, that 2 chord wants to go to the 5 chord and then pull us back to the 1. So that 2-5-1, which is very famously used in a lot of different music and especially in jazz, pulls us to the 5 and the 5 pulls us back home. provided that 5 chord is being played as a dominant chord and not a natural minor. Now the other thing we can do with that B is, instead of making it a half diminished, we can make it a full diminished. And again, we're now choosing a note from outside of the key. We're adding a little color in there that's not diatonic. But this is, again, something that is very commonly done. And here it really becomes a great substitute for the 5 chord or for the E7. And you can see that if I put an E note in the bass. They are essentially the same chord, except for this note here, and that note there is an F. It's the flat 9 of E. And so this gives us what we refer to as an altered sound. We're essentially playing an E7 chord with a flat 9 in it, which is tense and wants to resolve, and that means that the resolution is even more satisfying when we come back to. So that 2 chord we can do a lot with when we're writing in minor keys. Half diminished, working as a substitute for the D minor chord. Full diminished, working as a substitute for the E7. And this means we can start mixing and matching as well. So we could potentially, if we're in the key of A minor, we could potentially go to a B half diminished, implying departure, substituting for the 4 chord. Go to a B full diminished, implying return and substituting for the E7. And then coming back. With very little movement, we've gone 1 chord, 2 chord half diminished, 2 chord full diminished, back home. Another beautiful thing about diminished chords is that they move in minor thirds. Diminished chords are structured in minor thirds. They're created in minor third intervals. So if we're in, again, in the key of A minor, and we go to a B full diminished as our 2nd chord, that chord can also be played 3 semitones lower. And it's the same notes rearranged. Exactly the same 4 notes in that chord, but played in a different position. And you can see that here when we look at the voicing I'm using here. So the voicing here that I have is, I have a B, I have a G sharp, I have a D, and I have an F. When I move that chord down to this position, I have a G sharp, I have an F, I have a B, and I have a D. Exactly the same 4 notes. But the beauty of playing it in this position with the G sharp in the bass is that it's a semitone away from the A minor. And so it pulls beautifully back to the A minor because of that semitone resolution. So again, if we were in A minor, going to a 4 chord, back to our 1. What's another alternative for a 4 chord in case we don't want to hit the D minor again? We could go to the F and then go back to the 1. If we now want to create a departure, a sense of return, back to the A minor. But what if we want to go departure, sense of return, increase that tension with the sense of return and delay the resolution and then resolving. And we hear this a lot in minor keys. Again, if you're going to be writing in minor keys, that's a great sound. It's a beautifully versatile sound. So writing in minor keys and using minor chords is a beautiful immersive process, and we have barely scratched the surface. We've mainly been talking about Aeolian, natural minor, relative minor. They all go under the same name. We haven't talked about Dorian, we haven't talked about Phrygian, not to mention melodic minor, harmonic minor, minor scales and modes from all around the world. There are so many different minor sounds to explore, and this is just the beginning. But hopefully this has helped explain a little about how these chords fit together in a minor key, how you can use them functionally, how you can create substitutions for them, and how you can really get some interesting sounds and some interesting textures when establishing a minor chord as your tonal center. And so in applying all of this information to your next song, we're always thinking about this idea of when do we want to be at home and when do we want to be away from home? How long do we want to delay the resolution back to home? What kind of journey are we trying to take our listeners on? And can we find some interesting, unusual, and engaging ways to put these chords together? Hope this helps. Happy songwriting. See you soon. Bye.